Hi everybody, I trust you had a great summer. We're excited to be going again with a new name and a slightly broader focus. Today we want to talk about the end times, everybody's favorite topic, and specifically whether or not the types of natural disasters we're seeing in the world today, and here I'm thinking of Hurricane Irma that Melinda and I just escaped, the wildfires across the west, the 4 blood moons that made a splash a little while ago, recent solar eclipse, and the threat of nuclear war, are what Jesus was talking about in a passage of the Gospels, which we call the Olivet Discourse, because it happened with his disciples on the Mount of Olives. We can find this in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. Basically, as Jesus and his disciples are walking along, he says to them, "You see this big temple? Not one of these stones is going to be left on another." And they proceed to ask, when will this happen? What's the sign of your coming? What's the sign of the end of the age? And he gives a fairly complex answer that first talks about, he prophesies the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD by the Romans. Titus came in and destroyed Jerusalem. But he seems to also cast further than that, because he is talking about the very end of the age, and he doesn't break it down very clearly for us, unfortunately. And people fixate a little bit on his one passage where he says there's going to be many false messiahs, don't follow them. There'll be wars and rumors of wars, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, great earthquakes, famine, pestilence, fearful events, and great signs in the heavens. And it seems like any time some of these things happen, Christians get very anxious and say, surely this is the end of the age. Well, to do that is to focus probably a little too specifically on our immediate context. For example, as early back as 365, there was a massive earthquake in the island of Crete off Italy, and a tsunami that killed upwards of 500,000 people. We saw a great plague in Europe that killed about a third of Europe, between 75 and 200 million people in the 1300s. We saw a cyclone in 1737 in Calcutta that killed about 300,000 people. In 1783, a volcano killed 5 million people in Northern Europe, including 25% of Iceland. We've seen floods in China in the 1930s that killed between 1 and 4 million people. Up to 80 million people died in World War II. There's been famines throughout this century and previous centuries. I guess my point is that if you had lived during the Great Plague of Europe in the 1300s, when a third of everybody died, you would be sure you were living in the end times. Maybe if we lived during World War II, when so many people were being killed, and we would be sure we were right in the end times. And so in that sense, today is no different. These types of things continue on and will continue on. Jesus also in that passage said a key sign is persecution. Family is going to turn against family, and people will hate you because of my name. Now in the West, we haven't seen much of that, but if we live today in certain parts of the world, we would be sure that the end times were right now, because we were suffering such severe persecution. People talk about wars and they say, oh, this is the most tense time in history. Well, not really. The last 50 years has been worldwide probably the most peaceful time in history, even as we faced in the 60s and presently the threat of nuclear war. People got very worked up about the blood moons, but the fact is that there have been 8 sets of 4 blood moons since Jesus' time that all lined up with Jewish festivals, as they did recently. 8 different times this has happened. So I think what I'd want to say is, we're better off not getting too fixated on these signs, because Jesus himself said again in the same passage, about this day nobody knows the day or the hour, not the angels, not the Son, not me, only the Father. We're not meant to know. He did give us broad signs, but not for us to fixate on, because he also said right in the same passage, you have to be ready all the time. Nobody knows when I'm coming back, and I'm coming when you least expect it. Coming like a thief in the night. So we're to live all the time in readiness for Christ's return, not be fixated so much on signs, because it's not a thing to cause us anxiety. Jesus' return is a time of joy for the believer. So I hope that helps. I hope that helps some of you relax who are anxious. But I hope it helps all of us be prepared all the time.